So I'm going to be doing a tutorial for how to make natural lock extensions. These are for dreadlocks that are mature and done with natural hair. So this is actually Afro kinky bulk 20-inch hair that I'm using to make these lock extensions. Sometimes people need extensions when their hair has grown unevenly. Other times when you're moving your hairline from shaving the sides and back to maybe wanting a full head of dreadlocks when you only had locks on top. So this method is applicable for anyone in any of those situations. And again, I'm going to start with this Afro bulk kinky hair. So this hair is 20-inch, and bulk hair doesn't really have a beginning and end. It's just kind of all shoved in the bag. So you're going to just kind of take out a section. Make sure that your section is kind of an equal width or approximate equal width. And I have some Proclaim dread wax. I don't usually use dread wax for like retwists or for dread maintenance. However, when starting a lock, it can be helpful. Just make sure that you don't use too much, because wax buildup is something that you have to kind of wash out later. So you don't want a lot of wax buildup. You want just a little bit. So you're going to just start at the top by kind of rubbing that together just to get a little base. And I just like to put my little wax container just right on top of the end of the hair so something's holding it. And then just do a little bit of back combing. You're not really back combing for the typical purpose of back combing. What you're using the comb for in this case is to make the hair even in width, because you want that lock to be even all the way down. So you're kind of back combing to just arrange the hair or kind of pile the hair in an even width, so that when we kind of twist it and do the pulling needle to really get that dread solid and tight in the center, then it's going to be an even width all the way down and not be fatter and thinner in different places. You also want to make sure that you have an even width of hair for the purpose of structure. You don't want a spot in the lock where you don't have a good connection of the hair, or it can actually pull apart or kind of break off. And that happens with natural locks as well. Sometimes when they're not done really evenly, whether that means they were started with a sponge or just free form or whatever, or maybe the maintenance on them has been inconsistent. Sometimes they'll develop little thin places on the lock, and those can become structurally unsound so that it could break or kind of tear apart. So after I do the back combing, then I'm going to just palm roll. This is called palm rolling, just kind of going back and forth. And you should do it with enough friction to where you feel the heat of the friction. This should warm up your hands. So you want to really do an aggressive palm roll on that hair. And you can use your comb to kind of touch up some little spots if needed. Just once again, you want to make sure that this is even in width and thickness all the way down before you start with the little pulling needle. Now I have a couple of pulling needles that I'm going to be using. I have a 0.5 millimeter, and I also have a 0.75 millimeter. And you can kind of see, like, I'll show the differences in those two. So the larger the number, the larger the hook on the end, the more kind of macro pulling it does, and the more micro pulling is with, of course, the smaller pulling needle. And so a really teeny pulling needle, this is the 0.5, really will give you a very solid, very secure center to that lock that is going to be very good for a permanent lock extension. So it looks like all I'm doing is just pushing the needle back and forth, which honestly, that is pretty much all my right hand is doing. It's an extremely repetitive motion, pushing it back and forth. And then after about 50 pushes back and forth, I angle it more towards a vertical alignment with the lock and pull it out. And then you can see there when I held it to the light that is creating a compression of the hair to form a tight lock in the center. So what I'm doing though, meanwhile, with my left hand, while I am just going back and forth with the pulling needle, is you can see my thumb and forefinger are kind of rolling the lock back and forth, because you really want to be able to feel that the pulling needle is pulling on some hair. If you're just jamming a pulling needle in and out of a lock, it's not going to accomplish anything. You have to rotate the lock so that it finds different hairs, so that it can really kind of create a web of those hairs inside of the lock, which is what the dreadlock, really the nature of a dreadlock is. Basically tangled hair that really has formed a solid mass. So you're really forming that solid mass with your pulling needle, going back and forth and making a nice tight area. And you can see that it already has structure. There's no light showing through. Your dreadlock should not be hollow. And by the way, I mean, I'm using the term dreadlock not in a political sense. Of course, historically, anyone who is familiar with the history of locks knows that like dread is a term. The part of the dreadlock term dread is kind of negative and controversial in a sense. Like a lot of people kind of ban that part of the word. However, some people don't know what just locks are. So for the purpose of clarity of language, sometimes I use the terms interchangeably. So you can see that this lock is firm and it's solid, and it's also at the same time very bendable. So you can like wrap it around your finger. It's just like a natural lock. And again, this is made with human hair. You're going to leave out that little piece that I was putting under the wax container. That little piece you're going to actually need for installation, that little piece of hair, and you're going to use your pulling needle similarly for that little piece of hair. So these are some other locks that I have already made, some other lock extensions. And the ends are semi-finished on these. I actually am going to be cutting these to match the length needed when I install them. So I'm not really obsessing too much on finishing the ends, but I will do a little portion of this tutorial to show you kind of how I finish the ends. So if you have carpal tunnel, if you have any kind of nerve damage in your hands, like I have permanent nerve damage in both of my hands, this particular motion will definitely set that off and give you some numbness and make your hands fall asleep that night after doing it. So it is kind of a labor of love in that regard. If your hands are brand new and you don't do braids all the time or use them that often, then hopefully they'll be fine. So once again, we're going to use a little bit of wax to start that lock off, and the palm rolling and the back combing a little bit. And then we're going to be using that pulling needle, which is a tiny little crochet hook, to solidify that lock in the center, and to do it from the side. And then I'm kind of like showing you just really slow here, like you're just going in and out, but you really do have to hold that lock with your hands. So I'm going to try and give you an overhead view soon so that you can see it from a little different angle. You can see the veins popping in my hand because I use my hands so much. I have very strong hands, just from using them for everything, art and hair, cooking and cleaning, changing diapers, mowing the lawn, whatever it is. I'm using my hands all day long. So Again, this is just a back and forth motion that you're doing with the pulling needle. Just back and forth, and you want to really kind of pay attention to the feel with your left hand of the lock, making sure that you are grabbing hairs and not just, pulling the needle back and forth for no reason. So it takes a couple times to really get the feel of it. The first time you do it, it feels like you're doing nothing, but it actually does work once you kind of figure out how to roll that lock in your left hand, and meanwhile use the pulling needle back and forth with your right hand. So here I'm going to show you over top. Again, I start with a little bit of wax, put it on that section. We're going to palm roll it, and then I'm going to just take the wax jar and put that little end that's going to be left out for the installation process. Put that little end under the wax jar, and then just go ahead and start the pulling needle process to solidify the lock. So this is what you're doing with palm rolling. You're just going back and forth, and once again, you want to really feel the friction to the point where your hands get almost a little bit uncomfortably chafed or hot from doing this back and forth. You want to do it aggressively enough to force the hair into starting that shape for the lock so that you can get it nice and even all the way down. If it's a little thick in a spot, just go ahead and pull it a little bit to even that out. If it's thin in a spot, you can kind of add a little bit of hair in there and palm roll it back and forth a little bit more. Now, if your end at the top is a little bit too long, like this has a little bit too much hair, I'll probably trim that off a little bit later. But once again, just put your wax container on top of it and go to work with your pulling needle. So you can see that my back combing comb for this has like a lot of different little teeth in it, and I feel like it really does help even out the width of that lock just all the way down. And you can see that it's accomplishing something before we get to the little pulling needle part. So palm roll, and then back comb, and then palm roll again, and then you're going to take your micro pulling needle and really go ahead and get those hairs super combined together. So you don't want to pull the needle out of the lock. You can see I'm going back and forth because what we're really doing is tangling up the hairs, creating a web inside of the lock. We're not actually jerking the hair out of the lock. If you do that, then you're going to end up with a very raggedy dreadlock because you're going to literally pull those hairs. You can kind of see how you could pull those hairs out. So don't do that. Just go ahead and keep kind of within like an inch or so going back and forth in that motion so that you're really tangling those hairs securely within the core of that lock. You really want to make a core inside the lock so that it's nice and firm and hard and not hollow, not transparent, and not able to be pulled apart. So you're just going to go ahead and go back and forth. This is going to be very time consuming. It is probably super boring to watch, and I apologize if you're not a hair person watching and you're watching this video. You might want to watch something else at this point. But yeah, just going back and forth, you can see if you are a hair person, it's probably somewhat interesting to just kind of see the techniques. But if you're not a hair person, I can understand why this would not be super satisfying to watch, just because not a lot of big changes are happening super quickly. So just a lot of repetition and a lot of slow progress, and it does take time. And the reason why I don't actually offer a full head of locks pre-made like this, lock extensions, if I have a client actually ask for a full head of lock extensions, I just require that they purchase them online or purchase them somewhere else, because it takes a lot of not only just time, but it takes a toll on my hands to do it. So I do this only for the purpose of repair or replacement of a few locks, not like 80 or 100 locks on an entire head of hair. So you can kind of see how with the pulling needle, it'll get to a place where you feel like, okay, it's starting to become a dreadlock. And then you'll kind of also feel that that lock is not solid. It's still a little bit hollow. And that's where you want to keep going. You want to keep pushing that needle in and out. Again, it takes about 50 times for it to start locking up. And then, you want to keep going down that lock. So 1 inch at a time, all the way down. And there I clipped off some of that hair like I said I was going to, because you only need a little bit of hair at the top for the installation. You don't need a ton of hair. And part of the installation is going to depend on whether you're installing it to like an inch of hair that's grown out from the sides or the back of the head, or a spot on the hair where a lock is torn off, or whether you're actually attaching it to a dread that has kind of snapped off, that's maybe just short, and so you're actually attaching it to the end of a dreadlock versus attaching it just to a spot of hair. So if you're attaching it to just some hair on the head, you're going to want to either twist or braid that little piece down, and then go ahead and use your pulling needle and the hair that's left out on these extensions to really get all of the hair on the extension and that little piece of hair on the head really fully combined and interwoven. Make a really tight web with that, so it's never going to come off. If you're actually attaching it to the end of a lock, then you're going to want to kind of spread out the top of that hair and put the lock kind of in the center, and then use that hair kind of up an inch or an inch and a half or so of the lock to really get that all super combined and interwoven. So once again, your installation process is very similar to the actual process of making these locks. And if you can figure out how to really get the pulling needle to work for you in terms of making a nice, solid, dense lock, then you're going to have no problem actually installing that lock on your hair or someone else's hair. So once again, this is just Afro bulk 20 inch. Some places call it Afro kinky bulk, and there are different lengths of hair that you can buy. Make sure that it's human hair. In particular, if you're going to be bleaching the hair at all or dyeing it in any way, you do want to make sure that it is actual human hair and not synthetic fiber. Synthetic fiber, of course, as I showed in my previous lock extension tutorial, is so much easier to work with just because it heat sets. And with that hot water set, you can really, you can really twist it and just hot water set it, where you don't have to do a lot of webbing and backcombing and, threading needle work. So, but the advantage, of course, of this method is that it will blend with natural locks as opposed to looking like a synthetic or faux lock. So these are permanent, faux locks are temporary. So it's just a little different process in making the locks as well as wearing them, really. So here I'm just going ahead and kind of smoothing out or evening out that lock. You want to make sure that you continue with your palm rolling. If you get any kind of bumps in the lock, you can resolve those with a combination of the technique of palm rolling and the threading needle. So once again, I'm using mostly my 0.5 threading needle because the client who is getting these locks kind of added to some that have bent off or kind of cut off of his hair. His locks are very mature, they're very dense, and that 0.5 is going to give you the most dense kind of mixture of the threads or of the hairs inside of that lock. The larger needles, the larger pulling needles, even the 7.5, are going to still give you that look, but it's not going to be as dense. It's not going to be as solid or as mature of a lock. So you really want to just use the right pulling needle for the locks that you're matching your extensions to, if you want it to look like the same dreadlocks that the person has on their head, otherwise. So for many, locks are like a kind of an identity symbol, or for some they're a religious symbol. For others, they're more of just a political statement. And for some people, it's just a cosmetic, look, something that they like visually. So whatever your purpose is in wearing locks, they are very beautiful, very textural, and very easy to maintain overall as compared to trying to detangle natural hair every day, or even just styling natural hair of any texture on a daily basis. They really do require less frequent maintenance than that. So you can see here that I just have a little further to go on this lock. I'm continuing to use that little pulling needle to continue to create this lock all the way to the end. And just another little side note, I mentioned this in one of my other lock tutorials for faux locks, just that there's kind of a civil rights situation going on in some countries with regard to lock theft. So you definitely want to, and this is the 0.75, so you can kind of see the difference in how it acts with the hair. So with regard to people being mugged and their locks being stolen off of their head for the purpose of selling for people to have lock extensions. So definitely, make sure that your locks are fairly sourced, that you have a local person make them from bulk hair, or, if you order them, there are people who actually grow out their locks and then cut them and sell them on eBay even, or Etsy, or Amazon. I mean, there's just so many different places to get locks, but you might want to look into the source of your lock extensions, just, so that you have good juju in your head and not you're not wearing somebody's locks that have been stolen from them. That just would not feel very good. So you want to have good karma, good vibes. And there are people who, really are happy about selling their locks. They just want a different style. They want to change. They want to start over or whatever. And so they've cut their locks off and they just don't want to throw them away, because that seems like a big waste after all that time. So, they'll sell them, or there are other people that make these lock extensions from bulk hair, just make extensions to sell, so you can also find just a variety of things online to get the extensions that you need. So I also would recommend that you get the hair length correctly, so that you don't necessarily make spend so much time making a lock that's long if you really don't need a long lock. So once again, these are locks that I have finished, and you can kind of see that they are very solid and very mature lock wise. And I'll kind of stretch one out for you. I'm going to show you the finishing of the end. So you can use, once again, your little 0.5 pulling needle to finish that end. Sorry about my fingernails, like one of my nails came off, and that's just because I've been working with a lot of oils recently. So yeah, sometimes oils can get those nails destabilized. But anyway, so you just want to like go ahead and pull it. This time it's more of a vertical pulling of that hair, and go ahead and roll it back and forth with your fingers. Get a little bit of that wax and put that on the end. And then you're going to just go ahead and really roll that in the palm of your hand in a circular kind of way, and just palm roll it and just kind of like do that back and forth to really get that that end nice and solid. And then you can just clip off if there's like a little teeny piece of hair sticking out. You can always just clip that off and re-roll it again to get that solid, so that your ends are nice and mature as well and finished, and not like just curly hair on the ends or some kind of loose hair. So that's a really nice lock extension. And once again, you have that little hair on the top that you can use to combine and permanently install this. So you've got all of your locks, and they will look very natural. They're going to be a little bit stiff before they're washed. Once you can either wash these before installing, or you can actually just install them and then wash all the locks together. It will take a little bit of that stiffness out, help them relax a little bit, but they're just nice and solid, and that's what you want in a lock extension. So once again, I hope that this helps someone who needs to either repair some locks, or maybe you want to move your hairline a little bit and you don't know if that's possible because you have locks on top or whatever. Just some little hair solutions, tips and tricks, and you can try it out. I actually didn't order this hair. This particular Afro kinky bulk hair was brought to me by the client. So but I've seen similar hair on Amazon and on other online sources. So let me know if you have any questions. And once again, my apologies to anybody who's not a hair person. If you watch this video all the way to the end, then congratulations to you, because I would think it was probably a little bit boring for a non-hair person. So anyway, more videos to come. Stay healthy, stay strong, everyone.